All right, everybody. Hi, my name is Brad Case, and welcome to the very first episode of Life Worth Living, where I interview people who have lived a life worth living. And I am absolutely, if there's goosebumps, I got them right now. I have somebody who has become really special to me, and you will see why very soon. When I was 10 years old, I watched a movie called Rocky Five, and it left an impression on me because I found out that the bad guy, Tommy the Machine Gun, was actually a professional boxer. And not only that, he was awesome. He had the meanest left hook you've ever seen in your life, and he was a two-time heavyweight champion. And since then, my entire life, I've been a Tommy Morrison fan. I saw an interview one time with, it was recently, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, with his wife, Trisha Morrison. And it changed my life. I immediately reached out to her, and we have built a friendship. We built a partnership, and she's my darn partner in crime now, I am proud to say. So without any further ado, joining me today for my very first episode on this new series, Trisha Morrison. Trisha, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Nice to meet you again.
Yes, yes, ma'am. So we have talked ad nauseum. We have a lot of plans that we talked about. We'll get into that later. But I would just first of all like to say that I applaud your efforts. You've been doing this for a solid 9 years, 10 years now, and you have made so much headway when everybody was trying to shut the door in your face. So let's kick it off there. Um, what's life been like for you the last 9 years?
Well, it's actually been very busy. Trying to get the truth out to all Tommy's fans has not been easy for some reason. You would think that people would love to hear the real story. But it's through people like you, through people that are dedicated fans of Tommy, the word is getting out now. So it's exciting now. I just have to say, I'm just really excited about everything that's going to start happening for Tommy.
That's amazing. So if we can we'll give people a backstory. And Tommy, by the way, one of the all-time greats, underrated boxer. And for any of you who are watching this who don't really know who he is, you can YouTube it, and or if you can find it. The man is a legend. 51 3-1, 44 knockouts, 87.5% knockout percentage. Two-time WB, or he's one-time WBO champion, and was it the IBF
Yeah,
heavyweight champion?
yes.
And he is legendary. 1996, he was getting ready for a fight with what was it? Arthur Weathers, Arthur Stormy
Arthur
Weathers,
Stormy Weathers. Yeah,
and
yeah.
he was informed the day before that he had tested positive for HIV. And this is where we're going to kick off our journey today. So Tricia, what 1996, the day before he's getting ready to start or to kick off that fight with Arthur Weathers, which was supposed to end in a three-fight uh, deal with against Mike Tyson, and I believe it was it $8 million the
It was
contract.
more than that. It was a multi-million dollar contract. Yes.
And
Yeah.
so the day before, Tommy. So let's kick it off there. So how does Tommy find out?
How does he find out? Well, first of all, he doesn't find out until the actual day of the fight,
Mm-hmm,
which is February 10th, 1996,
mm-hmm,
in Las Vegas, Nevada. And how he finds out is he goes to his, really, I want to call him a promoter, but he wasn't really Tommy's licensed promoter.
mm-hmm,
His name is Tony Holden,
mm-hmm.
and Tony Holden calls him into his suite at the MGM Hotel, which, as you know, was one of the largest hotels in the world at that time in '96. And it's Tony Holden that tells Tommy that he has tested positive for HIV.
Now, there's a famous, and we're not going to give them that much airtime because I believe it was not the best portrayal of Tommy's life, career, and everything with the people that were in it. But he famously had a soliloquy in the ESPN 30 for 30 called Tommy, and we're going to get into that too, by the way.
Right.
But I actually have a clip, and I'm gonna see if I can pull it up real quick where he I have it right here, and I'm gonna add it to add it to our show here, and let's take a quick look at it. And
I didn't sugarcoat it. I said, Tommy, there's no other way I can tell you. Tested positive for HIV.
Let's try that.
Man, I didn't sugarcoat it. I said, Tommy, there's no other way I can tell you, but you tested positive for HIV.
The volume was really low on that, but basically what Tony is saying is that he had no other way to tell Tommy, you told Tommy he had HIV. And if you going on to his story, he said, Tommy said, we'll just worry about it after the fight. And he said, Tommy, there's not going to be a fight. You're done. But where did Tony get that information from?
Well, if you watch ESPN, you'll see that Tony publicly says to the world, because the world has watched this, is that Mark Ratner, who was the executive commissioner for the Nevada Commission, calls him on his phone and says, I need to meet you at the ring and don't bring anyone, right? And that was the day of the fight.
We have a clip of that too. Let's take a look at that, because I believe Tony's story isn't really holding up as well as he portrayed in that documentary, which, by the way, got way
Nevada Athletic Commissioner. He goes, listen, I want you at the ring right now, and don't bring anybody. I just need to talk to you. And I went up and sat down next to him, and he had tears in his eyes. And he goes, Tommy failed his test. And I said, what test? He goes, he tested positive for HIV.
Yeah.
He tells quite the dramatic tale of it, doesn't he? So before we move on. So then Tommy is told this news, and he's shut down before the 3-fight deal even started. Now, the way that documentary portrayed it was that he had lost to Lennox Lewis. They were going to give him one little swan song right off into the sunset, a 3-fight deal that was going to culminate in a 3-fight deal with Don King. It was going to culminate in a fight with Mike Tyson.
Right.
But you and I talked before, and that portrayal, it wasn't this last-ditch effort. The contract had been signed before the Lennox Lewis fight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's not forget that, back in 1996, when somebody tells you you've got HIV, that was like a death sentence, right? And here we are. It's very frustrating, Brad, because here we are, Tommy's sitting there listening to somebody who's not a physician and being told basically he's going to die by the time he gets to his car. And remember, Tommy was he just turned 27 years old, right, in January, a few weeks before. So can you imagine how he felt? I mean, the way you're starting your program, A Life Worth Living, let's not forget he had a life. He was a human being. And then to be told that he's got HIV while he's sitting on the sofa or the end of the bed in a hotel room by somebody that's not a physician, I cannot imagine how he felt, right? I've only seen how he felt from the time I met him. I never forgot that day. So the story that's being portrayed out there in the media by ESPN is being spun by all kinds of YouTubers, and nobody has taken the time to listen to exactly what's happened since then, the true story. So there's a lot of things that are incorrect in ESPN 30 for 30. There was a multi-million-dollar contract signed with Don King, and I have all the documents here in front of me, which I want to go through with you on that, because everything I'm saying is supported, is backed up in the court of law. So, I've pieced everything together, and what's out there still with ESPN 30 for 30 is not correct. And I really don't know how Tony Holden can just sit and watch that be shown every day in the world to people that are just believing somebody that was not a physician, right?
Right.
So carry on.
Well, actually, let's give a quick. I've always been curious of this, and all the times we've talked, I haven't asked. So, how did Tommy meet Tony, and how did Tony become Tommy's manager?
Okay, so Tony Holden became friends with Tommy. And, let's remember that, Tommy already had 290 amateur fights, right? And 21 he lost. He had 50 tough men fights, one he lost before he even met Tony Holden. And so Tony Holden actually was never his manager at any time, and that's in court records. He was never his licensed promoter either, and that's in court records. So basically, he's labeled himself, and that's in court records as well, as Tommy's advisor. And in the boxing world, to be an advisor, you don't need to get licensed by any commission, but it's a big title for some. So Tony Holden became friends with Tommy, but never he was his manager or his promoter legally on paper.
You made a statement just a second ago. We were talking about life worth living, and Tommy was a man. He was somebody. He was a boy who became a teenager, who became a man, who, in my personal opinion, was done the worst deal ever. And that's why I'm right next to you in every step of the way of this, to fix his tarnished legacy, which was no fault of his own. But what breaks my heart, going back to him, he was a man with feelings. He was a big brawny, 6'2", 230. But when this happened, his hometown, they used to have a sign up, hometown of Tommy Morrison. Everybody just kind of shunned him like he was a leper, and he was left with nobody when he gave so much to every single person that he came in contact with. There are so many stories, and we put it in some of our little vignettes in our promos. Yeah. Nice to meet you. Tommy never had a bad interaction with his fans or with anybody he came in contact with, and that breaks my heart that people just took this hook, line, and sinker, threw him out to the curb, and said, "Well, you're dead. Bye. Don't touch me."
Yeah, he even had this saying that he would tell me, Trisha, when the money's gone, so are your fake friends. So, he knew really by the end of his life, his true friends and who were actually there just to make money off him.
Well, let me ask you a question. And the final, I know we got to move on. Who were his real friends, in your opinion?
He had probably 5 good friends. And remember, in those days, in those days, only like 10 years ago, your phones actually would sync with each other, right? So he would have all my phone numbers in his cell phone. I would have all his contacts in my cell phone. For some odd reason, that's how they, I think it was Verizon did it, right? So I knew who his friends were. And I can name them, but I don't think I will today. But they will come up later on. But I can, on one hand, I can count his true friends that did not dump him when the times were hard.
Yes, and that breaks my heart because the man entertained millions of people, and and since we've started discussing, and since I've started talking about Tommy more openly, there have been so many people that have come out, and we're in West Tennessee, right outside of Memphis, and Tommy Morrison is seeing a resurrection in this part of the state, and actually online. He's almost like he's trending with the work that you've been doing, the exposure you've been giving it. But we're going to move on. So after the positive test, and so what's the next part of his story as it moves along?
Well, the so-called positive test led to him being rushed out of Las Vegas, right, back to Tulsa, supposedly for some more testing. And again, when I go through the documents I've got here, you'll find that actually there was no testing, because there's no test results in court records to prove that there was any further testing. So he goes through a period of time where very, very dark years, turns to drugs, and his whole life is completely ruined by that one diagnosis, which is now no longer a diagnosis.
Yeah. You become the most loved person in the room to the most shunned. And I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people that can blame going down certain paths and doing certain things until you've been put in that position, So when you said you had the documents in front of you, let's go through some of them, what you have today to share with us.
Okay. So I can actually sum it up. There is a fan out there. His name is Bill Mullins, and I'm going to sum it up the way he wrote it on a post, because I'm just blown away by Tommy's fans that really have stuck together with me on this. Mm-hmm. There was something that Tommy said, I fought for my fans. Would they fight for me? He said that one time back in 2011, sitting on the porch, and I'm thinking, just out of the blue, he says that. And I'm thinking, well, why are you saying that? And he said, because I fought for them. Would they fight for me? And at that time, there was nothing for them to fight for. Mm-hmm. But this one particular fan, Bill Mullins, he says, everyone involved in the HIV diagnosis now denies ever giving the diagnosis and denies that they suspended him from boxing. His widow at the time of his death, which is me, has fought tirelessly for a decade to prove he never had HIV, and backs it up with a mountain of evidence, including post-mortem tissue samples that show no trace of HIV/AIDS. And he goes on to say, please check out the facts for yourself and don't just believe the false narrative that has been circulating as truth for decades. Rest in peace. And he's just one now of thousands of fans out there that are getting wind of exactly what happened and is fighting for Tommy, which I think is really neat. So let me get into some of the documents. Are you ready for it?
Let me buckle up. All right, let's do it.
Right. All right. So everything that I'm mentioning to you is backed up by court records. So I just want to let you know that here's a picture. Can you see it? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. That's Dr. Robert Voy. Mm-hmm. And he actually writes and says, I did not diagnose you as having AIDS. I did your required licensing exam and found you physically qualified and fit to box at the time. And that is the physician that works for the Nevada Commission in Nevada in 1996. And you can look it up, docket 185, page 14, lines 1 to 4. So that's one bit of proof there. Then let's go on to this gentleman here. Mm-hmm. And can you see it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
And he is the counsel for this physician, Robert Voy. And in court documents, he writes, it is important for you to understand that Dr. Voy did not diagnose and never has diagnosed Mr. Morrison as HIV positive. And his name is Counsel Mortensen, and he's the legal counsel for Dr. Robert Voy. And you can find that docket 283, page 28, lines 14 to 15. Then you have the Nevada Commission itself. And they are called the state defendants, because I did take them to court on this. And this is why I've got all these legal documents, is I got exactly what I wanted. And the state defendants say, neither the state defendants nor the lab, Quest Diagnostics, ever diagnosed Mr. Morrison as carrying the HIV virus. And that's in docket 174, page 7, lines 2 to 4. And I can go on.
I've spent the last 3 weeks going through everything you've sent me, and it is, I mean, if you were to print it off, that's just what I have. You have 100 times more. It's about that. It's that thick. So now I know that at the time of his passing, There was also before or after the autopsy, they had also done blood work on him then, and at the time of his passing, no HIV, no AIDS.
That's correct. No HIV, no AIDS. There's more documentation here. Even the physician that did the weigh-in, Dr. Berliner, can you see that? Okay.
Yeah, I can see
it. Yeah. Even he said, that he was fit to fight. So going down to even the lab CEO, Dr. Henry Soloway, I conclude Mr. Morrison was never infected with the HIV virus. Now, this is the CEO of the lab in Las Vegas, and that's docket 136, page 9, 27 to 28. And he even puts it in an affidavit. You can't lie in affidavits. So that is in there. And then, of course, if you're in the boxing world, Dr. Margaret Goodman, and of course, this is all coming out after Tommy has passed away, okay, after that post-mortem report. So you've got Dr. Margaret Goodman, and there she is, well known in the boxing community. She runs the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association in Vegas. She is a Hall of Famer, right? She's got brilliant qualifications. And she says, it's a question she answers. I ask her, admit you can provide a document that confirms the diagnosis of the virus HIV in Tommy's blood on February 10th, 1996. Simple question. And she says, deny. She can't provide it. And she puts it on an affidavit as well. So again, you cannot lie on these affidavits. And Dr. Margaret Goodman has been with them, or had been with them, for years. So what happened was, you've got this great famous picture. Right? I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, ma'am, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, at the top you've got Magic Johnson, and also you've got his physician, Dr. David Ho, all right, who was on the front of the Time magazine, right, one year. And at the bottom, you've got a picture of Tommy and Tony Holden, right, who's not a physician, right, who's the one that broke the news to Tommy and stood by him at a conference. Right. Well, where is Tommy's physician? Why hasn't anybody else picked up on this? It's so blatantly obvious. And then, as you mentioned, we did have lots of testing done. And of course, a lot of this information I didn't know about, Tommy didn't know about, but they've got this one physician in Tulsa, right? And he notes that, and actually writes from James Hutton, an infectious disease specialist with Tulsa Infectious Disease Clinic in Tulsa, Oklahoma, shows that he initially examined the claimant, which is Tommy, in March 5, 1996. Now, get the timeline. The timeline is very important in this whole thing, right? February 10th is when Tony Holden diagnosed Tommy with HIV in Las Vegas, right? Yeah, and told Tommy he was going to, die. It was a death sentence. And then you take him to Tulsa, and then I can't even provide you with any physician's affidavit or any test results from Tulsa, right? That would support a diagnosis from Vegas. I can't provide it. The only thing I can provide to you is this Dr. James Hutton, right? And this piece that I'm reading to you is from an attorney, and he is stating that Dr. James Hutton noted that the claimant, Tommy, had been found to be HIV positive during testing that was performed in Nevada prior to a heavyweight boxing match that the claimant was scheduled to participate in. All right, so this is real important. So everybody now is referring back to February 10th, 1996. Okay, So nobody is taking the responsibility anymore of diagnosing Tommy because it was already done in Vegas. That's it, right? And that's docket 175, and it was filed on the 8th of June. So when I started to look and find all these things, um, I then turned to the FDA, the CDC, and all those organized government organizations. I did not want to be seen as a denialist, like Tommy was labeled, right? A conspiracy theorist. I wanted to do things properly. I wanted to provide in court everything that was necessary. And as it happens, the testing that Tommy underwent in during my time, and near the end of his life had never been done before on Tommy. None of the physicians from 1996 through to 2011 had ever done any of the testing that this gentleman here says you need. And that is Dr. Anthony Fauci, right? And Dr. and let's be honest, this is Dr. Anthony Fauci's virus, HIV. And Dr. Anthony Fauci, if you go back on some media, you'll see that he says that you have to have certain other diseases to be classified as having AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes, ma'am. I was waiting for us to get to our guest of honor.
Right.
So actually, that's really so. I'm going to play a clip, and I want to say one of the first conversations that Trisha and I had was we talked about Fauci, and we talked and honestly, I have not really always had him in the best of esteem, and duly so. I in the 80s when he was testing vaccinations for HIV or was doing HIV testing, when he first came on my radar, 05-ish, when the New York Times posted an article about him almost exclusively doing his testing on African-American orphaned children in New York City. And that's when he was already on my bad list there because, it's anyway, it's horrible. It's almost like eugenics or something. But we have a clip of Fauci. And I don't make it a practice to have too many clips of him because I don't want to give him too much airtime, but in context of what we are talking about, let me pull it up real quick. And let's see, here he is. I mean, he is looking 80s. This is an 80s look right here.
The secondary complications that someone will get who has AIDS, and let me explain what I mean. First, we'll go through the definition. It's the presence of pneumocystis carinii pneumonia or other opportunistic infections or Kaposi sarcoma. Now,
so, as it pause there, I'll finish the presence. So, what is he saying? There has to be other factors. Is that what he's saying, Trisha?
Correct. Yeah. So, HIV. When anybody ever spoke about HIV, they would always speak about Dr. Anthony Fauci. And Dr. Anthony Fauci's name, along with HIV, was kind of like a household conversation between Tommy and I. And so I'm thinking, when Tommy died, I'm thinking, okay, so I need to turn to Dr. Anthony Fauci and what he believed in and get the scientific evidence of somebody who had AIDS, right? So Dr. Anthony Fauci says in that clip that to have AIDS, you have to have a secondary disease. And that has to be pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, Kaposi sarcoma. So for short, it's PCP or KS, Kaposi sarcoma, right? And any other kind of opportunistic disease, right? So I'm thinking, wow, and I found that clip randomly, and